Republic of Congo. We will tell you more. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Strolinson live in Nairobi alongside my colleague Ramah Nyang, who has the business headlines. Ramah?
That's right, Richard. Here's what's coming up a little later in business. Acacia Mining has about 3 weeks to stop wastewater pollution at one of its mines in Tanzania. And further south, Aspen Pharmacare wants to split its South African business in two as part of efforts to clear its debt load. The details on the stories and plenty more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Richard.
Thank you, Ramah. We start in Beijing, where agriculture is a key factor in China's economy and security. Joining deputies from Henan province at the ongoing session of the National People's Congress, Chinese President Xi Jinping called for more efforts to implement the government's rural revitalization strategy. Let's take a look.
Henan is a major agricultural province with a population of 95 million. Addressing a group of deputies from the central China's province, President Xi praised the region's agricultural, social, and economic progress. He also urged them to make more efforts to revitalize rural areas and improve people's livelihoods.
I often go into less developed areas and villages. When I get there, I always ask local people what they still need. Our comrades living in the villages want a happy life. I think we're now working on that, but there is still a lot to be done. That is our next step.
President Xi Jinping said the chief goal is to modernize agriculture and rural areas. To achieve that, he called for more supply-side structural reform in tandem with green development. He said China's agricultural sector is vital for food security and called for better infrastructure in rural areas. Xi Jinping also urged officials to strengthen the leadership role of rural grassroots party organizations. And he said they should step up their efforts to improve social insurance and the minimum living allowance system in rural areas. Cao Bing, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has been answering questions from the press on issues around the world and relations with other world powers. This year is the 40th anniversary of China-U.S. relations, and Wang Yi said the two countries need to work with each other and not against each other.
The most important thing we can learn from the past is that China and America stand to gain from cooperation and lose from confrontation. Although a great deal has changed in the world and in both countries, this valuable lesson still holds true today and must continue to guide our interactions.
Wang Yi also said China supports the decision by the Chinese telecom equipment maker Huawei to sue the U.S. government to protect its interests. And referring to the stalled talks between Pyongyang and Washington, Wang said China would continue to play an active role and all parties should be patient.
As the nuclear issue has dragged on for decades and complicated factors are at play, one cannot expect it to be solved overnight. All parties need to have reasonable expectations, and one shouldn't set the bar too high at the outset or make unilateral, unrealistic demands.
The Foreign Minister also commented on China's massive international development project, the Belt and Road Initiative. He said it has become the world's largest cooperation platform, and the participating countries are now seeing the benefits.
To date, 123 countries and 29 international organizations have signed BRI agreements with China. They have cast a vote of support and confidence in the BRI. From the start, the BRI follows the sound principle of consultation and cooperation for shared benefits. It has created enormous opportunities for all participants.
Wang went on to discredit the allegations made against China regarding its presence in Africa. He said their bilateral cooperation had always been open, and China wanted to create a platform which would bring more development and investment to Africa. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi also called for more investment in Africa. He urged the international community to increase input in Africa to promote development on the continent. Daniel Arap Moy has more on this report.
Chinese investment in Africa has been rising steadily in recent years. China's current Africa Major Development Package is a $60 billion pronouncement by Beijing last year. The fund is part of a range of new measures aimed at strengthening China-Africa relations in loans, grants, and development financing. China's Belt and Road Initiative has created economic opportunities and boosted common development agenda across Africa. But there are concerns that Chinese loans for Africa under the Road and Belt Initiative could increase debt risk for some African countries.
I think that the initiative from China is always good. It's upon the African countries to look at it from a perspective that is it sustainable? And I think sustainability is more of an internal affair.
Foreign Minister Wang, however, says criticism that China has established a debt trap in Africa should not be considered seriously, as Chinese African cooperation is open and inclusive. Under the flagship Belt and Road Initiative, China helped accomplish Kenya's fast high-speed railway from the capital Nairobi to the port city of Mombasa. There are plans to extend this network into South Sudan, Uganda, Rwanda and Burundi. The fund covers telecommunications, construction of roads, bridges and seaports, energy and human capacity development. The $60 billion package has since been broken down into several projects and aligned to the Chinese government's Belt and Road Initiative. Some of the major projects in Africa are Abuja Light Railway System in Nigeria. The 45-kilometer light rail system is the first of its kind in West Africa. Izimba Power Station on White Nile. The power plant in Uganda is being developed by China International Water and Electric Corporation. The project is expected to ease severe power shortages in Uganda. New container terminal in Ghana. The new container terminal will allow some of the world's largest container ships to dock. The 153 megawatts Adama 2 wind farm. The wind farm, the second largest of its kind in Africa, helps to boost Ethiopia's ambition to develop a modern climate-resilient economy. Maputo Bridge in Mozambique. The bridge is being constructed by China Road and Bridge Corp. It's the longest suspension bridge in Africa with a main span of 680 meters. China's Africa diplomatic ties has continued to flourish, with Beijing resuming diplomatic ties with Gambia and Burkina Faso. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Meanwhile, the ongoing two-session summit in Beijing continues to elicit reactions from Africa. South Africa's Institute of Global Dialogue has welcomed the Chinese government report 2019, maintaining the necessity for countries to pursue economic development alongside protecting the environment.
I think China's always maintained a sustainable development with a kind of sustainable energy approach. It's never been something that hasn't been in the policy documents of China, both at the domestic level as well as at the international level. So in all fora, whether domestic or international, there's always been that approach and that commonality around the fact that sustainable development cannot be achieved if you don't approach it in a way that protects the environment, or there's a sustainable energy approach to it.
And as the world marks International Women's Day, women in South Africa's security forces have been urged to take the lead when it comes to issues of gender-based violence. The day is a focal point in the movement for women's rights. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has more.
The South African National Police Services as the initial entry point into the criminal justice system in this country, and therefore responsible for ensuring that victims of crime are provided with victim-friendly service. But that's not often the case. South African police are notorious for allegedly re-victimizing survivors of crime, especially those who come to report gender-based violence. The frontline officers are often blamed for being uncaring.
We need to take leadership because the women agenda, one of the strategic objectives says we are going to be ensuring that we fight gender-based violence. We are going to be instrumental as women. We must take leadership as women towards ensuring that what is supposed to be happening, it's happening. I call upon women police officers to take lead when it comes to issues of gender-based violence.
But the women in the police force also suffer the scourge of gender-based violence in their respective communities, and therefore were also honored here at this event held by the South African National Police Services celebrating women.
The women of this country have been in the forefront of struggle in trying to liberate themselves, as we know that they've gone through some kind of a triple oppression, that they've been oppressed on the basis that they are Africans, and they've been oppressed because they are actually belonging to the working class, and they've been oppressed on the basis that they are the women at home.
A call was made to men to break their silence.
We should directly speak to men and boys in commending them, those who have spoken out and stood with women and girls as they hold up the other half of the sky. We call on all men to also take a stand and hold up their half of the sky to speak out and take action, because silence and inaction of good men conspire against women.
The South African government has undertaken to prioritize women and girls' issues, to also intensify campaigns to fight violence against women and girls. You listen to Jamila for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Ethiopian Airlines is running a return flight operated by an all-women crew to mark International Women's Day. The flight from Addis Ababa to Stockholm, Oslo, and then back to Ethiopia left on Thursday and returns on Saturday. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
Amsale Gwalu is the captain of Ethiopian Airlines' all-female operation this International Women's Day, in charge of flying from Addis to Europe and back with a women-only crew.
I'm sure this flight inspires a lot of young girls to be part of, to achieve whatever they want and go for their dream.
Amsale became the first female Ethiopian Airlines captain in 2010. In December 2017, she flew to Lagos on what was the first all-women flight in Africa. This is the fifth such flight Ethiopian has operated globally. The airline has operated women-only flights to Lagos, Bangkok, Kigali and Buenos Aires before this route to Europe. Ethiopian says it plans many more after International Women's Day. Kalkidan Girma is not involved this time, but was part of the all-women flight in 2018 too. She began her career as a pilot when she was 21 years old. 7 years later, she says being a pilot has nothing to do with gender.
All the challenges are because of the job, not because of the gender. So it has nothing to do with being a female. But luckily, we're being more progressive. So people are coming towards it, and more women are interested in being pilots nowadays. So I have a feeling that in a few years, being a pilot is going to be a norm for females.
And Ethiopian Airlines says it is setting its sights high as it tries to boost its female staff.
Young girls should believe that they can be pilots tomorrow, they can be engineers, they can be aeronautical engineers, designing airplanes, maintaining airplanes, and flying airplanes. So it is an inspiration for all the young girls and women in Africa.
The airline has 100 female technicians in different sectors. Its aviation school in Addis Ababa has attracted female students from all over Africa. And as the flight touches down in Addis Ababa on Saturday, its crew will hope to have inspired a new generation of women to aim for the skies. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
And to discuss this, we are joined by Mpiwa Mangwiro, Regional Campaigns and Advocacy Specialist from Sonke Gender Justice. Thank you for joining us. Let's talk about this year's theme, Think Equal, Build Smart, and Innovate for Change. What are your thoughts on that?
Good evening and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, I think that this is a very relevant theme for celebrating International Women's Day, because it's challenging every one of us to think about an equal world and to also try and innovate in terms of how we can attain the equality that we need, and also in terms of how we can address some of the challenges that women and girls continue to face, particularly for them to be able to also equally participate in the technological era that we have, for them to also have equal opportunities as their male counterparts, and also to be able for them to be able to be economically viable. So I think it's an acknowledgement of the fact that we're living in a very technologically advancing world, but at the same time it's also a recognition that we have not yet attained the equality that we need, and it's about time we do things differently. It cannot be business as usual. We cannot continue to do things the same way, because at the rate at which we are going, we can never attain the equality that we need for women and girls globally.
Well, women in Africa have been for several years marginalized, denied opportunities, especially in decision-making posts. While there have been attempts to bridge the gap, for example, in Rwanda and Ethiopia, there have been attempts, and they have been doing this quite well. I'm sure you would agree with me that a lot still needs to be done. Can you elaborate?
Certainly, there have been some great strides, and as you have spoken, you've given examples. We have countries like Rwanda, where we have almost 61% of female representation in parliament. We also have Ethiopia, which has also almost attained parity. And Namibia as well, countries like Namibia, where they are pegged at about 46%. But much as we have seen some of those advances in terms of political representation, it has not translated to total representation in every sphere for a woman. We know that even in countries like Rwanda, where there has been great strides in political representation, there have been some backward slide in terms of economic gap. The economic gender parity gap has opened up, and in many other countries there are still countries that are still lagging behind in terms of even representation for women. The quota systems have still not been fully attained in the different countries. And also we know that when we are talking about poverty, when we are talking about unemployment, when we are talking about sickness and disease, many times women are the face of that. And so much as there may have been some strides politically, these need to translate into every aspect of a woman's life. And in that regard, there's still a lot to be done. And we also see that when it comes to aspects like gender-based violence and abuse, women are still at the receiving end of men. They live in constant fear for their lives. They are not even able, in many households, women are not even able to make decisions about their own lives, about their lifestyle choices, about issues around family planning. You find that women are not in control of how many children they want to have, yet it is their bodies that are going to carry those children. So definitely there is still a lot that needs to be done, because women's lives still need, there's still so much that needs to be done to transform women's lives, and for us to really attain the equality that we're talking about. But far above that, for us to improve the quality of life of women and girls.
All right, let's talk about stereotypes. I know it's hard to counter stereotypes because they are firmly rooted in society. For instance, most would say doctors are likely to be men and nurses are women. Men are more focused and women are easily distracted. How can society deal with this limiting or negative stereotypes?
I think society can deal with the negative stereotypes by, first of all, we need to deal with those social norms and gender norms that are very harmful, that perpetuate the negative stereotypes that we deal with. There's need for gender norms transformation. We need to really deal with the way we see a woman and we perceive a woman and perceive a man. And because that is from there, it is those relations, it is that perception that generally tends to affect how the relationship between the different genders happen, and also that tend to manifest those negative stereotypes, those toxic masculinities. So there's really need to change that from even from the home space, the way children are raised, what is expected of a boy child, what is expected of a girl child. These are issues that need to be interrogated and need to be transformed, because the picture is painted from home. What children see a mother doing, what children see a father doing, paints the picture of how they will grow up, and they are also going to in turn respond to the opposite genders, or and it also affects how they are in turn going to respond to their female or their male counterparts, with women mainly being the ones at the receiving end of these negative stereotypes. So there is a need to really challenge society, to really challenge these harmful norms and practices, to engage different stakeholders to come to the table and to interrogate why we perceive relations in a certain way, and to help us to get to a point where we realize that the biological differences are just that. But when it comes to the way we relate, there is no need for us to then perpetuate some of these negative norms, or to create these gender practices and cultural practices that really continue to oppress and to subjugate women. So that's one of those things that really needs to be done. Dialogue needs to happen at different levels, at religious and traditional leaders levels. Young boys need to be engaged, young girls need to be engaged, communities need to be engaged to really bring that transformation.
Mampiwa Mangwiro, thank you for your insights. I think we can leave you with an old saying that goes, what a man can do, a woman can do better. I'm sure we can appreciate that all today. Thank you once again reporting and your insights from Johannesburg. All right, it's time now for a short break. When we return, we have a lot more news coming your way, including at least 1,000 people dead in the latest measles outbreak. Nigerian voters prepare for Saturday's governor's vote.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Thousands of Algerians have taken to the streets protesting against President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's bid for a fifth term. Men and women converged on the city's landmark Grand Post Office Square, despite warning that chaos could break out. Security in Algiers was tight, with anti-riot police vehicles patrolling the streets. Past demonstrations have been mostly calm. Earlier on, President Bouteflika had warned that troublemakers who may try to infiltrate the demonstrations will be dealt with. Is the European Union ready to normalize relations with the Democratic Republic of Congo? Relations may be improving, but an EU official says they cannot be described as normalized. The bloc is still adopting a wait-and-see approach. CGTN's Miriam Zaidi has more from Brussels.
Just last month at a joint EU-African Union meeting, the EU Foreign Affairs Chief Federica Mogherini said that they are ready to work with President Tshisekedi. The European Union is, of course, an important partner for the Democratic Republic of Congo and will most likely continue to play an important role in the country. Now, over the last few years, the EU has given some 709 million euros to the DRC to help improve governance, infrastructure, but it also, of course, maintains sanctions, a mix of both travel bans and asset freezes against those associated with Joseph Kabila. And those sanctions were renewed last December ahead of the elections. But for the EU, also having a representative on the ground would help. But when it comes to return of their ambassador to the DRC, who was ejected from the country on the eve of those elections in December last year, well, there's no date in the diary set for his return. Miriam Zaidi, CGTN, Brussels.
Still on the Democratic Republic of Congo and the announcement of a power-sharing deal between the party president Felix Tshisekedi and his predecessor Joseph Kabila is drawing mixed reactions among Congolese citizens. CGTN's Chris Ochemringa reports from Kinshasa.
The party of DRC President Felix Tshisekedi signed a power-sharing deal after weeks of failed talks over the choice of a prime minister. Joseph Kabila's Common Front for Congo and President Tshisekedi's Cap pour le Changement agreed to jointly choose a new premier. Former President Kabila's coalition has more than two-thirds of MPs in parliament. Under DRC law, the party with a majority of lawmakers gets to choose the prime minister.
First, we have the possibility to decide that FCC will be the only one with the prime minister and all the ministers in the government, which is possible according to the law.
Some Congolese citizens have expressed concern about a power-sharing deal with the former president. Others are happy an agreement's been reached.
We are excited that the two sides have agreed to work together. We are now waiting for a prime minister who will serve our country.
The agreement between the two parties should be implemented quickly. We don't want further delays in the implementation of government projects.
President Tshisekedi has faced difficulties implementing changes he promised during campaigns because he has a minority in parliament. His election was disputed by opposition leader Martin Fayulu, who described it as a backroom deal with Mr. Kabila. Both the president and his predecessor have denied that claim. The announcement of a power-sharing deal comes a week after President Tshisekedi expressed frustration at being unable to win parliamentary support for his choice of prime minister. His reform plans for the country will now depend on how well he works in coalition with Joseph Kabila. Chris Ochemringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
We stay on governance matters now, and 2 weeks after they voted in presidential elections, Nigerians will be heading back to the polls this Saturday. They'll be electing state governors and members of state houses of assembly. As CGTN's Samson O'Malley reports, the stakes are high.
If the card reader picks your card, verified, and your name is not in a register, you cannot vote.
They came out in force 2 weeks ago, and they are planning to come out again this weekend with their choices for 29 out of the 36 state governors.
I'm going to vote in this governorship election because it's necessary to vote. It's our right to vote and to bring a right candidate.
I urge you to maintain calm.
Nigeria's governors are among the most influential politicians in the country, controlling budgets sometimes larger than those for entire African countries.
As far as the people are concerned, the person who, as it were, holds their destiny in their hands is the governor.
More than 50 million Nigerians are expected to take part in the gubernatorial election this weekend.
In Nigeria's federal system of government, state governors wield enormous power and might just have more influence on the day-to-day life of citizens than the president himself.
The presidential elections 2 weeks ago were marred by the late arrival of ballot papers, boxes, voting materials, and the failure of smart card readers. The Nigerian Electoral Commission is working to improve things this time around.
From here, the materials will be escorted by armed security, which you have seen around, and tomorrow they will be distributed to the various rack centers. And on Friday, movements and activities of the rack centers will commence.
The presidential elections were also marred by violence, intimidation, and harassment. Those elections were won by incumbent President Muhammadu Buhari. Saturday's election is expected to be a straight fight down party lines between Buhari's All Progressive Congress Party and the opposition People's Democratic Party. Samson Omale, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
Let's go now to Ramah Nyang for the latest business news.
Thank you very much, Richard. Here's what's coming up in business. Acacia Mining has about 3 weeks to stop wastewater pollution at its biggest mine in Tanzania. And Aspen Pharmacare plans to split its South African business in two in order to reduce its debt load. All that and more is coming up next. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Acacia Mining has until the 30th of March to stop wastewater pollution at its North Mara gold mine in Tanzania, or the government will shut down the facility. The government says Acacia must stop contaminated water from seeping from a waste storage dam at the mine to water supplies used by nearby communities in the country's north. Now, it alleges that the toxic water from waste rock at the North Mara's tailing storage facility was being freely discharged into the environment. North Mara is Acacia's largest single mine. It produces over 336,000 ounces of gold last year. That's roughly 65% of the company's entire output. The mine has faced long-standing accusations of pollution. Acacia Mining has consistently denied those. On to Zimbabwe now. The central bank there has denied allegations that it has fixed the exchange rate of the new transitional currency, the RTGS dollar. Now, earlier on, the RBZ had said that it would leave the market to decide the appropriate exchange rate to the US dollar. The country ditched a widely discredited $1-to-$1 peg for the dollar surrogate bond notes and electronic dollars. Shortly thereafter, it created a new currency called the RTGS dollar. Since then, their value in the interbank market has remained roughly at about 2.5 to the dollar since the 22nd of February. It's been stubbornly at that level. Zimbabwe's economy has been crippled by a cash crunch, and plans to allow ordinary Zimbabweans to exchange bond notes and electronic dollars for US dollars at banks have yet to be implemented. On to East Africa, Uganda's government has issued a travel advisory to the business community, especially concerning the movement of goods into and out of Rwanda. Last week, Rwanda blocked products from Uganda from entering its territory in a move that has strained relations quite a bit between the East African nations. According to the Ugandan Prime Minister, talks are underway to resolve their issues. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke with the latest.
Uganda's trade minister is advising trucks carrying cargo from Uganda to enter Rwanda via the Mirama Hills and Chanika border crossings. Delivery vehicles heading to the DR Congo have been encouraged to use the exit points between Uganda and the DR Congo. Normally, cargo trucks heading to the DR Congo town of Goma prefer going through Rwanda as opposed to the longer route through western Uganda. The Prime Minister of Uganda has told Parliament that the two governments are in contact with a view to resolve the impasse.
Government will give a report to this August House on what this situation is and how it has been finally resolved.
This week, Parliament tasked the government to explain the standoff with Rwanda. Legislators argued that while Rwanda has given its reasons for the border closure, Uganda remains tongue-tied.
This is a matter of life and death. The moment there is an escalation between the two sides, you don't know what is going to happen to your citizens. And the government is just hiding its head.
Hundreds of cargo trucks remain stranded at Uganda's border crossing with Rwanda. Many are from Uganda. Others originated from Kenya's port of Mombasa en route to Rwanda, Burundi, the DR Congo, and Tanzania. This area in downtown Kampala is often congested with trucks delivering grains and cereals from Rwanda. But business has slowed down in the last 1 week, with many dealers here counting losses. Fred Mwesgwa deals in beans, but he says prices are being pushed up as supplies run low.
We get a lot of tonnages from there, like 20 trucks per week. They are coming from Rwanda, Kampala. And the means they are taking a lot of trucks to Rwanda, like 50 trucks per week. Yes. No business. All that is at standstill.
Amid the frustration and uncertainty, the Ugandan government is urging the business community to keep calm as tensions are addressed. And while commerce is at the heart of the dispute, the Ugandan Trade Minister stressed the free movement of Ugandans to and from Rwanda remains unrestricted. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Now then, figures from MTN Group's 2018 full-year results do show that the company may have joined the ranks of firms with over $2.7 billion in revenue in Nigeria. Revenue from the West African oil producer was up 17% to $2.8 billion last year. Operations in the country accounted for over 28% of group revenue. MTN Nigeria may also be listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange by the end of the second quarter of 2019. The firm did see growth across pretty much all its business lines. Voice revenue up over 18%, data revenue up by over 40% year on year, data traffic also up by 56.3%. Over in South Africa, the multinational drug company Aspen Pharmacare says it will split its commercial pharmaceuticals into two divisions in order to reduce its debt load. This is part of a strategic review of operations. The company has transitioned from being a generics-focused business into a multinational firm with specialized therapies. In December, Aspen's headline earnings per share fell by 9% to about 51 US cents from 56 US cents the previous year. Normalized EBITDA fell 3% to $379.4 million as revenues were up marginally, up 1% to about $1.4 billion US dollars. For many in the African economy, tourism could be a major driver of income and employment in years to come. They're showing off what they have to offer at a major international tourism fair in Germany, but there are many challenges for these economies, from developing infrastructure to overcoming security concerns. Iris Spitzer reports from Berlin.
More than 180 countries, each trying to paint themselves as the perfect holiday destination. Berlin's massive ITB Travel Expo is a mecca for the multi-trillion-dollar global tourist industry. For the African nations here, it's an opportunity.
Tourism is very important to Kenya's economy. It creates jobs. It's 9% of the job creation. It's also now jumped from 10% to 14% of the GDP.
Kenya welcomed a record 2 million international tourists last year after seeing numbers plummet due to terror attacks several years ago. Overall, Africa hosted 58 million tourists, 5% of the global market, led by South Africa and Morocco.
From pristine beaches to cultural experiences, like seeing the centuries-old tradition of East Africa's Maasai people up close, the continent has no shortage of the things that international tourists are looking for.
But security is still a concern. More than 20 people died in a terror attack in Nairobi in January, and several countries are dealing with internal conflicts. Infrastructure is another issue, with connections more difficult than many other travel destinations. Western and Central Africa in particular have struggled to attract tourists. But the potential is clearly there.
Africa is certainly one of our trendy travel destinations at the moment. It's very popular in Germany. Most people begin with South Africa.
She says that after that first visit, her guests usually want to see more of Africa. The tour operators here hope visitors to the fair feel the same way and are ready to experience the real thing. Ira Spitzer, CGTN, Berlin.
President Donald Trump's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, has been sentenced to nearly 4 years behind bars. But that, remember, is a fraction of the 19 to 24-year prison term indicated by sentencing guidelines. Last August, Manafort was found guilty of 5 counts of tax fraud, 2 counts of bank fraud, and 1 count of failing to disclose foreign bank accounts. The ruling comes in the wake of the special counsel, Robert Mueller's investigation into Russia's role in the 2016 election in the United States. The judge imposed the 47-month sentence on Manafort in Alexandria, Virginia. Also ordered him to pay a $50,000 fine. Next week, though, he faces sentencing in another case in the District of Columbia.
Mr. Manafort finally got to speak for himself. He made clear he accepts responsibility for his conduct. And I think most importantly, what you saw today is the same thing that we had said from day one. There is absolutely no evidence that Paul Manafort was involved with any collusion with any government official from Russia.
One final story for you. China's Premier Li Keqiang says that the country's economic growth will likely slow down to its lowest level in 28 years in 2019. He made those comments when announcing the growth target range of 6% to 6.5% for this year. That's down from 6.6% in 2018. CGTN's Richard Bestick sat down with the chair of the Institute of International Affairs at Chatham House for a review of the numbers.
Li Keqiang's forecasts for the next year are the lowest in 28 years. To what extent is the trade dispute with the United States dragging on that growth?
China's slowing is something we expected. So 6% is part of that trajectory. And if anything, it's slightly above where I thought China might be right now. Second thing to say is because China's now above 13 trillion, if China grows by 6% the next 2 years, they're close to creating another United Kingdom. So yes, it is China slowing to its softest rate in nearly 30 years, but it's after China having gone from 1 trillion to 13 trillion in 17 years. So China should be happy if it can grow 6% for the next couple of years. And so long as it doesn't result in problems on employment and problems for the consumer, I think it's fine.
But Premier Li Keqiang says we've got difficult times ahead. If everything's fine, what's he on about?
It's a very good point. It might well suggest that he is worried that if they just leave it all to natural forces, growth is going to be weaker than 6%. That there's already rumblings of longer-term issues about the sustainability of the consumer and where are all these jobs for people still migrating into cities coming from. And that would be a problem. And perhaps one way of interpreting his sort of concerns is that him saying, we're not going to allow that to happen.
I'll leave it there for the time being. Here's what's coming up at the top of the hour, though. Nigeria could be on the hook for $9 billion in a dispute that dates back the better part of a decade, frankly, with a natural gas company. What exactly happened and how did we get here? Find out live from Lagos at 1800 GMT. For now, though, back to Richard.
Thank you so much, Ramah. You are watching Africa Live on CGT, and we have lots more news coming your way. Here's a look at what's ahead. We visit a zoo in Cairo that offers animals hot drinks to help them cope during the cold season.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. For years, scientists have gathered information linking animal behavior to the climatic environment that they live in. In Egypt, zoo manager and the animal carers are giving the animals hot drinks to help them survive the cold season and to manage the impact climate has on their behavior. Let's take a look.
Climate and environmental changes have a direct impact on all life, and for animals born to survive in the wild, drastic changes to their status have to be managed to stifle the threat.
We give animals hot drinks in the winter because it gives them energy and it helps them forget that they are caged.
For workers at Cairo's Giza Zoo, the winter season calls for new feeding programs to keep the animals' spirits high.
Chimpanzees like tea because of their genes, because they share 94% of their genes with humans. So we feed them with tea and milk and belila, an Egyptian food containing wheat and milk.
In these days, we make tea with honey and we make belila to help the chimpanzees keep warm.
The beginning of every year in Cairo records bitterly cold temperatures going as low as 13 degrees centigrade or even as low as 0. And for animals accustomed to free movement for survival, zoo constraints come with extreme temperature exposure.
If the animal feels cold, it might get a flu and it might get sick at any moment. So we try to replicate their life conditions in nature by giving them food regularly. We need to clean their cages. When you do things the right way, the animal will live with you for a long period.
In addition to the weather challenge is the issue of space.
When there is a big number of caged animals, there's less space. As a result, the animals become nervous. It affects their reproduction negatively because they're caged in a tight space. They're used to living in nature. Even if they were born in captivity, their behavior reflects life in nature. We have 5,600 animals of all species, more specifically 5,640 birds, reptiles and mammals.
And in line with the animal protection agenda, efforts taken up by Giza Zoo advance the role that such institutions have to preserve various species for future generations. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Further afield, UK-based pianist Rebecca Amordia is bringing African music to modern audiences. The classical musician directed and performed at the first ever African concert series in London's October Gallery. This recital was designed to bring works by Nigerian and Ghanaian composers to a wider audience. CGTN's Brian Toussaint brings us more. Let's take a look.
Rebecca Amordia is a classically trained pianist, half Nigerian and half Romanian. She is part of a younger generation of performers rediscovering African art music. This genre blends traditional African elements into classical Western music.
I'm playing music by Nigerian composer Ayo Bankole, who was one of the most prolific composers from Nigeria. He derives from the Yoruba tribe, and his music is characterized by traditional Yoruba folk tunes.
The first wave of African composers attended music colleges in the UK over a century ago. Their composition style was born out of necessity. Solemn hymns brought over by missionaries lacked appeal on the African continent.
The church who wanted actually during the campaign of evangelization they found a big obstacle. People were not very keen or didn't like the Christian hymns. So that's why they approached the aforementioned names in order to indigenize those hymns. And that's the beginning of that movement, African Art Series.
I'm a huge fan of Fela Shawande's work. So I normally tell people that there's Fela before Fela, you know, and the fact that his pedigree was was represented here today in terms of the interpretation of his music was incredibly stimulating this evening.
These Nigerian and Ghanaian composers remain largely unknown to mainstream audiences, but their work has piqued the interest of modern musicians like Omordia. Last year, the UK-based pianist released her album, Ikele, piano music by African composers. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
All right, time now for a short break. We've got your sports news coming up. Here's a look at what's ahead in sports. Teams scramble for knockout slots in the CAF Champions League.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match